Now, in the past mini sermons, we've talked about racism and what a believer can do actively in this world, in the church, in society. But today, we're going to change the direction because the Apostle Paul and Jesus Christ recognized the spiritual reality in the battle and the warfare in that spiritual reality. So, we're going to talk about racism and spiritual warfare. This is very, very important because if you don't understand that, you think that you have everything under control. And humanity, if we do everything right, will get this world perfect or in the proper direction. As a believer in Jesus Christ, we realize that that is a limitation. For the Apostle Paul says we don't just fight with flesh and blood, but we battle with the heavenlies. So what can we do as believers in light of the present turmoil? Now, I don't know how long this mini sermon is going to be. I might move it to next week too, in part 1 and part 2 on spiritual warfare. But I wanted to talk about prayer. Prayer is very, very important. But one of the interesting things is many of us have a misunderstanding about prayer. You see, we think prayer is all about asking God and having Him come into our lives and do something for us that we need. Now, I'd say maybe 10% of the prayers of the Bible incorporate a divine deliverance, asking of God to do something miraculous in our lives, either timing or bringing something to pass. But because we think that that is what prayer is predominantly, we actually shortchange what prayer can do. For most prayer in scriptures are sort of theological in nature and involves an attitude toward God, 90%. So let me just reel off some of the things that can occur during prayer. First, I said there is the asking of divine deliverance. You have not because you ask not. But there's a second category of prayer that sometimes you ask, but it really involves your daily activity. Give us this day our daily bread. We go to Safeway, we go to Costco, we get our bread. But it is a mental focus that it's beyond what we do. There are prayers for wisdom, understanding of what is happening. Any of you lacks wisdom, ask of God who gives the answer to us. Book of James. Sometimes prayer is thanksgiving. Other times prayer is confession. But I think 3 that are very, very important to the current turmoil and the racism is the prayer of Habakkuk chapter 1, the prayer of Nehemiah, also found in Nehemiah chapter 1, and what Paul tells us in the book of 1 Timothy. I want to get a Bible here. Hopefully I could read some verses to you. First, in the book of Habakkuk. I might have pronounced it wrong. Here it goes, chapter 1. How long, O Lord, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry out to you violence, and you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look at wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Sounds like the United States at this time. Well, this is the prophet Habakkuk. And what is very interesting is that there is the need for believers to actually understand what is happening and actually call upon God to fix this and to call violence, violence, and injustice, injustice. And that should be part of your prayer life. There should be some prayerful, righteous indignation into this, asking God to intervene to help. But there is a second aspect of prayer that I think is very, very important. And that is found in the prayer of Nehemiah, chapter 1. I'm just going to read verse 7. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments or the statutes or the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Now, what is very interesting about Nehemiah, it's also seen in the prayer of Daniel, is that it is not this righteous indignation, But Nehemiah is confessing and, more importantly, identifying himself with the problem. See, it's one thing to say, oh, it's those guys, it's those people, you know. You get rid of those people, Lord, everything be fine. What's very interesting is it's balanced by Nehemiah, who says, I am part of the problem. Oh, the balance of those two distinct themes, to able to identify injustice and cry for violence to end, but also understand societally we are part of the problem. And in one sense, we are no better than anyone else. A final aspect of prayer that I think is important for us in this very, very tense political climate is what the Apostle Paul writes Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1 and 2. First of all, then, I urge that entreaties and prayers, petitions, and thanksgiving be made on behalf of all men, for kings and all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. Now, what is so interesting about this injunction is that we need to realize when this letter was probably written. We don't know for sure. But the best sort of guess of those who hold to a high view of Scripture is that the Apostle Paul wrote this after his first imprisonment. You see, there were these things called the prison epistles, and those were Ephesians, Philippians, those books, Colossians, Philemon, prison epistles. And that's during his first imprisonment found in the book of Acts. Most people think that 1 Timothy was written after his imprisonment when a short time he was freed, perhaps a fourth missionary journey. This is remarkable, for the Apostle Paul is asking that all believers pray for all their leaders, even though he himself had been, I believe, falsely imprisoned for his fervent faith in Jesus Christ. That's very interesting. Pray for the leaders. Pray with thanksgiving that we may lead a tranquil life. And can you do that? In these very difficult political times, that's probably the hardest thing to do. You probably give thanks if your candidate's Biden, you know, and then you'll give thanks. And if he's not elected, you'll complain to God. And if Trump's your man, then you'll give thanks if he is the president. And then if he's not, you're going to complain to God. Now, here's the thing. All three, Habakkuk's prayer, Nehemiah's prayer, and what Paul asks us in praying for our leaders, all are involved and should always be in the sort of balance in the person who is following God. I hope this helps you. This mini message is a little longer than my usual mini message, but I wanted to give you a full picture and to give you a balanced picture. For we realize that our fight is not just with what we do and how we vote, and what we demonstrate, and what we complain about, and what we can do with our own power, but is to understand that we have the mindset of God, and we understand that this is spiritual warfare. So may God bless His word and help us in this time of need.